Top of the morning, everyone. My name is Tshidi and I'm back with another video. And today's video is speaking about single column versus double column resume templates. What is our views? Now, I'm going to explain something that some of the recruiters might disagree with, or some might actually agree with because they think this actually does work. And some of the people that use ATS systems that have got AI that's helping them reduce the number of applicants will obviously agree with me on some of these bullet points. Now, we've got normally different types of resumes. We've got a 2-column resume where it's normally 2 different columns with different information on each side of the columns. And then we've got a 1-column resume. You'll see on the screen what a 1-column resume looks like. And you can also see here on the left-hand side what a 2-column resume looks like. So please, if you want to pause this video to just check out what they look like, please pause it because I'll just keep it here for you guys to be able to see. Now, most job seekers are basically used to the standard 1-column resume, which is a whole page of information. They are more familiar with what's written there. It's just normally there to say name, email address, all that information, and then filters through all the other side. Now, the 2-column resume are the new modern resumes that we're starting to see coming up a lot, especially when people are trying to save on space. Now, they can work for applicants in just making sure that you reduce the space in the field that you're actually playing around with. And sometimes they do work against you, and they're beneficial for you as a candidate to reduce the number of pages, but they're not always ATS friendly. But what I'm going to try and do is to just sort of explain to you what the difference between the two and what they actually have. So maybe let's start with the single column resume pros. What are the advantages of that? They are usually ATS friendly layout. Now, ATS is applicant tracking system. A lot of companies have got so many different applicant tracking systems. Some of the companies have now enabled AI in some of their ATS to be able to sort of help them screen candidates. And when they screen you, they score you with a specific score to say, out of 100, this person is 90, or out of 100, this person is 50, and this and that. Now, the reason why it's sometimes easier to be able to do that is because what the ATS does is that it looks for specific keywords that align to the job spec. So it looks at your job spec, and then it looks at the keywords that you put in your resume. And depending on what you've put there and what you've answered at some of the questions that they've asked you, it will then give you a specific score. Number 2, the pro of actually a single column. Formatting tends to stay put when in the different software platforms. So you'll find that if you format it in such a certain way, normally the format stays exactly the same. Especially if you load it as a Word document, the formatting stays the same. What sometimes helps with double column, resumes or CVs, is that put it as a PDF so that it actually doesn't move anywhere else. But as a Word document, you find that some of the disadvantages is that when somebody opens it on the other side, it's just all over the place. It's a bit of a mess. So the 1-column resume, you find that the resumes, the templates normally stay as you've loaded them. They look exactly the same way to the other person. And then the last bullet point on this one is more common, so preferred by employees and employers. The 1-column ones are normally, this is what we're used to. We're used to those 1-column. The new ones, obviously AI still has to get used to reading those, but I'll take you through some of the cons of some of these things. But it is one of those things where it's a lot easier. Most employers are used to being able to just see a 1-column resume where it's got names, education, boom, 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 and it's all this information follows through. Now, there is then another thing that we then speak about where it's the disadvantages of a single column. Now, single column resumes, number 1, use a lot more space for the same amount of information that you've got in a double column. Because you'll find that where you could put more information on one side and then the next column you put another information like the double column, you'll find that you end up having to put a lot of information on just because so that it follows chronologically. And that's one of the key things that you need to do. Try and make sure that information is chronological order because then it actually makes a lot of sense. Number 2, takes longer for human eye to skim through. It takes a bit longer, especially for us recruiters, we have to go through all these things, and it takes us a bit longer from a single column point of view to go through your resume. However, like I said, it is the common one that most people are used to. So that's one of the pros to it, but the disadvantage is that it takes a bit longer for somebody to actually skim through it. And then number 3, more difficult to highlight key qualifications. You can actually play around with where you put the qualifications or key areas of success. However, I do think that the single column is just a bit difficult, because sometimes you'll find that with a double column, you can do one aspect, which is your key responsibilities, and then on the other side, you can then put about your key outputs, where you can say, out of all these things that I've done, these are my success points. Now, we then have to jump back into the double column resume. The pros of actually putting together a double column resume makes it easier to emphasize an employer's most sought after qualifications. It's a lot easier to highlight those things. For example, on the one side, on the left-hand side, you can put all the skills to say, these are my skills, I've got this. And you can highlight those on the one side. On the next side, you can then talk about the roles and responsibilities. So you can put roles and responsibility on the one side and then say, based on this job that I've done, these are some of the key skills that I gained out of that. It's fantastic to actually sometimes be able to use that. Provides a visual balance between the work experience and the other sections. So it's easier to just look at it to say, okay, cool, I'm looking at work experience. Okay, what about the skills? Oh, here are the skills. Okay, work experience, skills, work experience, skills. So it's a lot easier to actually go through. However, it is a new format that people are now using. So that's why it's sometimes a bit tricky. Has a sleek and modern look. Like it's actually pretty nice to look at a 2-column resume. That's the fact. And that's one of the reasons why it's sometimes actually quite nice. However, the disadvantage or the cons of actually a 2-column resume is that it's not always ATS friendly. Yes, you can use it, and it's sometimes very good. Some ATS systems are actually brilliant enough to be able to read through that, but it's not always ATS friendly, because as I mentioned earlier, sometimes you find that the formatting gets all over the place, because once you load it up, it just reformats your resume and it's just a bit of a mess. So it's sometimes not very ATS friendly. And I know somebody's going to ask them, why don't the guys work on ATSs? Remember, some of the employers don't necessarily develop their own ATSs. So you'll find that there's a company that specializes in developing these applicant tracking systems, and they don't necessarily have to worry too much about some of these things until there's enough complaints. Then they can actually go focus on fixing that. Number 2 is it's less common, so some employers might actually find the layout distract from their actual content. Because it's new, it's modern, it's a quicker way of putting a 5-page resume into a 1-page resume. Some of the people get distracted a bit, so it's still quite new and people are starting to get used to it. But I do think that the more we start seeing it, the differences will actually start coming up. And then the third point is can make content appear cramped and difficult to read, because some of the people will then still put in so much information in that. And because it's actually in a format where there was a specific format that they were looking at, you end up struggling to sometimes get some of the bullet points that you're looking at. So those are the pros and the cons of an ATS system when we speak about a double column versus a single column resume. I hope that made a lot of sense, guys. Thank you so much once again for watching this video all the way until the end. Until we meet again in the next video. Peace.